Oh yeah, Tiger, but I'd like to see you try and mix King Crimson. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the awesome plugin that we are giving away in the giveaway contest for people on the Recording Bootcamp mailing list. And I'm going to get to answering some questions from you guys. As a lot of you know, we're starting to do regular giveaways for people on the Recording Bootcamp mailing list. You sign up every month just like you would any other contest, but you have to be on the mailing list to win. So if you want to get more information about that, check out the link below where you can sign up to potentially win. But the plugin we are giving away is the awesome Pusher plugin from Kush Audio. And the Pusher plugin, you just kind of got to play with it to know what it is. It's still kind of tough for me to wrap my head around, but it's also something that gets me a lot of really cool, unique sounds that I couldn't get with any of my other plugins or hardware. It's a combination of some really simple but powerful limiting and some very complex and powerful saturation. So the guys over at Kush Audio really made something cool, interesting, and unique, and they've been nice enough to give us a copy that I can give away to one of you. So again, go down here, you can get a link to learn how to sign up, and also a link to learn more about the Pusher plugin. And better yet, you can even download a demo, try it out, see if it is something you are excited about. This episode is coming to you live from the 7th hole on the Capon Springs golf course. It is the par 5, the monster. It's the longest on the course, and it is all uphill. But I've got the whole course to myself. Literally, I have the whole course to myself because in the off season, it is so cool and mellow here. And in the off season is when we are doing the recording retreat in the middle of May 2016. And if you want to join us, hang out with some great recording folks, take some workshops, play some golf, eat great food, check out recordingretreat.com and get information about how to sign up. We're about half sold out at this point, and as the time of shooting this video, we only have about 3 spots left in the sort of super cheap rooms available. So check that out if you want to know more. But this episode, I want to get to your questions. I'm actually just out here doing some logistics for the retreat and playing golf. So the first one is from Darren. And Darren says, do you have recording tips for recording orchestral recording? What kind of equipment do you need, etc.? Well, that is a very complex question and a very simple one. The great news, whether you're recording on a soundstage or in a church or even some weird rehearsal space, most great orchestral recordings are primarily a simple set of microphones, either a stereo pair or what they call a decatry made out of 3 mics or a few others. So most of the sound when you hear a great orchestral recording is usually a small number of mics. They actually might have a lot of other mics up there to reinforce certain elements or things like that, but most of the sound is from a small set of microphones. So the thing is to focus on that small set, whether you're going to do an XY pair or a decatry or something like that, you know, and put all your resources into that. Get the best possible mics you can, best pre's, best converters, and assign them to that. If you don't have a lot of great gear, use your lesser gear on the spot mics, because you should be able to actually get a pretty killer sound just with a small number of mics. And this leads way too easily into a promo. At Recording Retreat, we actually are lucky enough to have John Rod, who is an amazing orchestral recording guy. And he works on big Hollywood films and some of the biggest video game franchises in the world. And he is a real expert at recording and mixing. So Darren, if you come join us at Recording Retreat, you can hang out and hit John Rod up with all sorts of questions. So, Roy wrote, I recently received files of a small kids choir recorded in an ambient room. Is there a way to remove the sound from the stereo track? This is a tough one. It kind of is baked in, and there is actually software that can do this. It's one of the new advances in processing technology is being able to sort of deverb things a little bit. One that might be the easiest to get into is SPL makes one. I think they call it deverb or something, and it's essentially the sustained control of their transient designer, I think. So that actually works, and I'll use that actually even on a vocal or something, or a guitar that's got a little too much ambience. And I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are actually a few new plugins that do reverb removal in a more detailed way. I think they're pretty expensive, but really you need to look at specific processing for that, and it is a tough one. You may just have to reduce it a little bit and live with it. Rick writes, what are the most common mistakes, problems you encounter when you mix or master a song? The most common problem, and the biggest, stupidest problem, because it has no upside, is people recording their tracks with hot levels, going into digital hot levels where they're clipping or almost clipping, whether it's on the individual track or on the stereo bus while they are mixing. It's just stupid, it hurts audio, and there is no upside to it. Do not do it. And I'm really hyped up about this now because just before I left out here to West Virginia, I mixed a track with some amazing musicians, a cool song, and the levels were just clipped all over the place, and it so hurt what I could have done for the band. You know, I still got it enough to make them happy, but I know I could have stepped it up to a much higher level. There is no upside to recording hot tracks ever, period, and anyone who disagrees with me about that is wrong, and I am right. That's about the only thing in recording where you'll hear me talk that way, but don't ever do it, period. So Jimmy writes, me and my friend were trying. So sitting in an airport editing this episode, I realized two things. One, this episode is way too long, too much editing, and probably gets boring really quick. The second thing is, I actually forgot how much I enjoy doing the Ask Ronan episodes. So I'm going to attempt to do something. I want to start doing Ask Ronan Turbo Mondays. So I'm going to attempt to every Monday put up a new Ask Ronan episode that's only going to be 5 minutes max. So send me some questions. If you want your questions submitted, go to recordingbootcamp.com/ask and send me a question. I'll start queuing them up, and every Monday release a video of me getting through as many questions as I can in 5 minutes. So hope you join me. Now back to this really long episode. So Jimmy writes, me and my friend were trying to understand more about the XY configuration for recording guitar. So that's a good question, and usually pretty easy to answer. If you are going to record acoustic guitars in stereo, which most of the time I don't, I actually prefer most of the time acoustic guitars in mono, but XY is one of my preferred methods. And XY is basically you're taking two cardioid microphones and basically putting them at a 90-degree angle. X-axis, Y-axis, right there. And the reason that this is cool is because wherever the guitar is, any point on the guitar, the sound is going to reach both of those microphones at more or less the same time, giving it very, very good mono compatibility. Any of your other sort of wacky stereo guitar techniques, two out here, one over the shoulder and one out in front, all of those have absolutely terrible mono compatibility. So you might decide later that you want to make the guitar more mono because that's what fits into the mix, or it gets broadcast back in a shopping mall or on TV in mono, and the guitars often just sound terrible with those other stereo techniques. So XY is one that I really like because the capsules are coincident, meaning sound reaches both at the same time. The nice thing about XY is it does give a very nice balanced mono. It's very mono compatible, and it's very just nice and soft. It's not crazy and out of whack, and but that's the reason it is my favorite. So, and this XY thing, you can move it around anywhere you want, hunting for that best sound. And also XY can work great on drum overheads, drum room mics, string quartets, choirs, anything. Anytime you want great mono compatibility, but still a nice sense of stereo and an accurate, natural sense of stereo, XY is a really, really good way to go. Andrew Glassford writes, any tips on making vocals bright but without being brittle and harsh? This is another perfect lead-in. I did not set this up. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel because the next video I have in the works is exactly this. So rather than answer it now, for Andrew, hopefully you guys are all going to subscribe to this, and I'm actually going to go very in-depth on how to solve this, keeping them from being brittle and bright, but also keeping sibilance from getting too out of whack. One of the other questions is, it's kind of windy out here and I don't have any kind of windsock. Just have the camera turned on, so you guys are probably getting a lot of wind noise, and I apologize about that. So, why do my live recordings seem to lack the power and presence of studio recordings? Aaron writes in about that. Tough question, but part of it might be that with a live recording, you're almost inevitably going to get a lot of bleed from the other instruments. Sometimes a bit of bleed between the microphones can be a nice way to get depth and ambience into a track. But when you have a lot of it, we start introducing lots of phase relationships, excessive ambience, and when an ambient and punchy and impactful are opposite ends of the spectrum. So if you actually have lots of bleed within the microphones, it's very difficult to get it to be as punchy as a more isolated situation. Same would be if you recorded everybody in the same room together in a studio situation. So things you can do is maybe gate out, or in the DAW snip out the mics or the channels when that instrument is not playing. That's a way to give you a little bit of extra punch. And then really we're just using a lot of the same dynamic processors we would try to do that we would use to get anything big and punchy. All right, marathon sessions. I'm having fun with this. So John writes, how do you recognize the points of diminishing returns in the recording studio? I'm thinking about things like dialing sounds, choosing the right synth patch, deciding when a mix is finished, and where you might spend an extra 2 hours onto something and realize 2 hours ago it was better. That's a really tough one. It used to be a lot easier because, you know, back in the old days when I was a boy, everybody didn't have their own studio. You and the band, whatever, would save up all your money to buy 2 days of studio time. So the option of I'm going to spend 5 hours dialing in my guitar sound on this indie record, that just wasn't a thing. You were going to get it, you know, good, get something that was kind of exciting and go with it. And now, with everybody having their own studio or working with people in their own studios where that clock isn't ticking as often, that can actually be counter to productivity and creativity a lot. So one of the things I try and do when I'm working on things myself or as a producer helping coach artists through the process is, I think when something puts a smile on your face, that's good, we move on. It's one of those things, sometimes you'll dial up a guitar sound and go, wow, that's a killer guitar sound. And then somebody will want to keep working on it and trying new things. And it's like, yeah, sure, if you're Peter Gabriel and want to spend 10 years on a record, but for the most part, if you've got a guitar sound that everybody just said was killer, we've got a killer guitar sound and we can just move on. So that one's always a challenge. But really my thing is, when you do something that puts smiles on people's faces, consider it done. Move on and get smiles on people's faces for the next thing. Jason writes, can you go over reasons why you ride faders and what do you listen for and what do you feel it adds to the mix of bass, guitars, drums, etc.? Well, Jason, this is a very, very in-depth question. But riding faders, whether we're doing it manually or doing it, automating it with the DAW, the thing about riding faders is it allows us to sort of showcase different elements of the mix as we go. So they're in the guitar section, like guitar solo. Maybe we pull the keyboards and the rhythm guitars back a little bit, and that allows the guitar solo to shine a little bit without having to push it as loud. Same thing, when the voice comes in, pull the rhythm guitars back a little bit. That lets the voice shine. And the cool thing about how we experience music is when something is like big and clear for us, even for just a few bars, we sort of feel it's that way on the whole record. So if we go and you know, have a part where the guitars sound great, the kick drum sounds great, the voice sounds great, when we listen to the whole record, we'll kind of get a feeling of, oh yeah, that's what the guitar sounds like, that's what the drums sound like, that's what the voice sounds like, and we'll think it sounds big the whole time, when in reality it doesn't. We're just changing the stage and giving each thing a chance to shine when it's doing the coolest and most interesting stuff. So Jim writes, what's the quickest, most effective, cheapest soundproofing tips and tricks, DIY, etc.? Well, Jim, unfortunately, the answer to this is to go get the real estate ads in your local newspaper and figure out where you're going to move to. I wish I was being sarcastic about this. There is no such thing as cheap and easy soundproofing. They're inexpensive things we can do to make a control room sound better or a live room sound better inside, when we get into issues of soundproofing, we are getting into issues of construction. We're talking about mass and, you know, separating walls and joints so they don't connect. It is a long, deep, involved process, and it is not easy, quick, or simple. Anybody who tells you otherwise, be a little wary of, because this stuff is difficult, challenging, and expensive, and it isn't something you can hang on the wall. It is something you do at a structural construction level. So I wish I had a better answer for you. So Stephen writes, how do you wake up your ears when you're very tired and need to get that one last take? How to not force things? Well, that's a really good question, and one thing is, if you have the option of not forcing things and you can come back the next morning, that's probably your best bet. But that's not realistic when we're pushing deadlines or we only have the studio for a day, etc. But the biggest thing I can say is just disconnect. You know, if I'm working on a rock record, I'll stop, just turn on some world music or something, go for a walk. I'm lucky enough to have a recording studio that's a few blocks from the beach, and I can just go out, take a walk, go down, put my feet in the sand, and come back. And it's amazing how much that break can help. One, it just lets your ears rest, but also a big thing is perspective. When we work on something, hear the same thing over and over and over again, we lose perspective. It gets fatiguing, it gets tiring. So take a break, and if you want to chill out, I like to listen to completely different kinds of music if I want to play some music, and then jump back into it. But really, the break, taking the walk, is probably the best possible thing you can do if you've got that little bit of extra time. Jason writes, and it's pretty elaborate, his question, but more or less he's getting at, when you're running things to outboard processors, how do I deal with the fact that the audio is being degraded as it goes back, as it goes out to the analog gear and comes back in? Well, one thing is, I actually have really good, really high-end analog to digital and digital to analog conversion. So in my own studio, it doesn't really mess things up in any way that I would worry about. But even on cheaper stuff, like, you know, things like the Motu Traveler, which I think those converters sound really bad. And so we did a test once, actually. We set it up blind, of course, where we ran audio out through this Motu, which again, myself and the other engineer notoriously did not like, and compared it to the unrouted one. Absolutely, the one that stayed digitally sounded better. But then what we did was we used a plug-in EQ, and then we actually ran through the Motu Traveler converters out to a really beautiful API EQ, and tried to do a similar EQ and printed those back in. And when we listened back and forth, we every time preferred the one that had gone out to the analog processing. So it was our takeaway that the analog processing, the improvements of going out to that were big enough to offset any negative stuff happening by going through the analog loop, even on these converters that we were not fans of. So I say don't worry about it. And this isn't getting into a battle of plugins versus hardware, which is better. If you have a piece of hardware or even a cool digital box that you love the sound of, love the character of, and it brings something cool to your production, don't lose sleep over sending stuff out and bringing it back. You know, when you're at a mastering or 2-bus level, maybe be a little bit more cautious, but still, if there's hardware or any kind of outboard boxes that you love and want to be part of your creative process, don't let the small degradations in converters, especially with these days, even lower grade converters keep getting better and better. My recommendation is go for it. Take the small hit to creatively do what you want. All right, and so the last two questions here. So Nicholas asked me, hi-hat mics, are they worth it or are the overheads enough? Depends on the drummer and the style of music. So most of the time I find that the overheads are enough. That's kind of my approach. I like to get, you know, most of the cymbals and even most of my primary drum sound with overheads. But if I've got the channels, I almost always put up a hi-hat mic just so we've got it. It might be the kind of thing where the drummer wasn't as good of balancing his drums as he could have been, and we need to reinforce that. But also a lot of styles of modern pop and production, a unnaturally forward hi-hat is stylistically part of the vibe. So it's not about capturing the good natural drum sound, but creating this stylistic thing. So if you've got the channels, throw something up, you know, make it one of your lesser primary mics. I actually like SM57 sometimes for hi-hats. Oddly enough, the SE Electronics X1, not an expensive mic, but that's what we use a lot. And if you've got the money, the old Neumann KM84s are fantastic for hi-hats. But we actually use the much more affordable SE X1 a lot for those. And the last one, I think one of the most interesting, is from Tom on Twitter, asking twofold. Just people send me mixes using, I'm assuming things to mix using drum loops? Can I tell? How do I get them to be more realistic? And we'll do that part first. Well, yeah, that happens quite a lot. And of course I can tell, especially if I'm looking at things at a mixing component. The things I can do to make them more realistic, if it's appropriate, I actually might add some human element to it. So if it's the kind of thing where I could actually add a shaker or a tambourine, it's amazing how much just a little bit of action, you know, real human action, some real human air bouncing around can actually make something feel a lot more natural. And beyond that, a lot of times what I'll do is techniques with really just different kinds of saturation overdrive, whether it's from compression, a piece of hardware, or a lot of the cool saturation plugins that are out, like the Pusher, which we are giving away. Click on the link below. The Pusher is a perfect thing to really vibe up, you know, fake drums or drum loops. So click on the link below and enter to win that. But that's the thing, really, a lot of times smearing and crunching them up. Sometimes the drums loops or built from samples can be almost too clean and perfect and gives them an unnatural feel. So sometimes a little bit of gushy compression, a little bit of saturation can help them sort of blend in with the other instruments better. And the last one from Tom, which I think is the most interesting question, says, am I morally obliged to tell an artist if I use drum samples or pitch correction? So I had to think about that one. And my answer is, when I'm mixing something, I am morally obliged to try to get this artist the most awesome record they can. And an awesome record means one that either helps their career or helps get them to their artistic vision. So I don't think anything is off the plate in terms of trying to get them to be there. The one thing where I would feel that I'd have some kind of moral issue about what I did was if the artist or the producer specifically said, I do not want to use pitch correction, or I do not want to use drum replacement at all on this record, I feel I have a moral obligation to try and, you know, honor that request and find a way to make them the best possible record I can without using those things. I'm a pretty good engineer for drums, so it's usually not too tough for me to get some killer drum sounds without drum replacement, even though I do that on some records that I mix. And one trick, if you're working with an artist that like is very much against using pitch correction, but you're listening to the voice and it's like, boy, this really needs some pitch correction. One of the things you can do is actually thin the voice out a lot, because it's a lot of the lowers and the lower mids is where we really get our sense of pitch and intonation. So if you can actually thin out the voice and maybe bring up the bass or thickness in the guitars to support that, it won't be as obvious that the voice is out of tune, and you will still honor the artistic integrity of the artist. So Lucas asks, what about Tiger Woods versus CLA Part 2? A reference to an earlier video that I made. And what I have to say about that is, screw Tiger Woods versus CLA Part 2. Let's do Tiger Woods versus RCM. Ha! Take that, Tiger!